Greetings, everyone. It is I, Tantus Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor, here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome everyone on YouTube or Twitch. Wherever you're joining me, welcome. Today, I'm diving into something I haven't talked about on either of my channels in quite a while, in a direct format, Magic the Gathering. Now, if you're familiar with my YouTube side, I had some pretty extensive Magic series that have been in the past. And this is the first video in a while that is talking about, well, Magic again. And this is something that I always intended to talk about more, but never did. The formats of Magic. And in this version of things that we're going to do, we're going to deep dive into a whole bunch of different formats you can play, some of which are very popular now, others of which are not. A good example of something that is a very popular format that many people have heard about is, of course, Commander. We'll talk about Commander and a little bit about its kind of origins and what it is, but EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander, or Commander as it's called, is one of the main staples of formats that you're going to play. If you're going to go somewhere, play with some people, it's one of those. But there are a lot of different formats that are out there that you can enjoy, and they come in a variety of different versions. To break it down a little bit more, I will be talking about both paper, online, and arena-based ones. The thing is, there are some online or arena-based formats that can be played in paper. And the same could be said a lot of the paper ones, when I talk about them, they can be played in different formats too. It's just some are very specifically for certain formats. They unfortunately just don't translate well to others. So, some of the ones I'll be talking about are constructed formats. What do constructed formats mean? Well, simply said, you build a deck, you bring it with us, bring you to a thing. That's as easy as it is. And this is the basic for a bunch of different formats. The same can be said with Eternal. It's basically another version of constructed formats, so the constructed / Eternal are two of the main ones that you're going to have. Another one, of course, is the limited formats. The limited formats come in that they are ones that were originally put for a certain period of time. They can be in two different formats there. Some of them are draft, some of them are constructed, but they were set along a period of time based around a number of sets or things like that. So limited formats can still be played, they just don't exist. Now, draft, of course, is the idea of a very casual form where you don't bring a deck to a place, you go there and you build a deck wherever you are. There are multiple types of drafts and things like that, but it's the idea that you're going to a store, you're building your deck at the store, and then playing. And of course, we'll talk about the multiplayer formats, which are formats with more than 2 people, because original Magic was 2 people. Let's start, of course, with the very basics of a lot of these things here, with the constructed sets or constructed formats, which are the most, honestly, I wouldn't say the most popular, but they are the ones that show up the most. There are, as of right now, 6 formats that are considered constructed that you can hit into, and if you're going to a tournament or a location, these are the most likely ones for you to play. And of course, it starts out with Standard. Now, Standard was originally known as Type 2 Magic and came about in '95. So that's pretty old one that comes in there. It's traditionally a best of 3, one-on-one. It's very heavily tournament style. There is a version of this in Arena. We'll talk about that when we get to our Arena talk for specific Arena things. But the idea is it's also a rotating constructed format. What does this mean? Well, it means, of course, I'm bringing my deck that I'm building there. Minimum of 60 cards. No maximum deck size, but you have to be able to shuffle it without any help. A sideboard of up to 15 cards. And except for basic land, no more than 4 copies of any card. That is the standard deck construction for a lot of decks. The 60 cards, 15 card sideboard, no maximum of 4 cards, and then the have to shuffle on your own. A lot of decks will have that. Now I'm going to call that the standard formation of deck building. So when I talk about standard deck building, that is the standard deck building from now on. Now, standard has evolved, the Type 2 as it is. Currently, I did talk about this in a previous discussing tabletop, and I've talked about it before. There are, of course, a rotation history of it. That rotation history has evolved. Originally, it was based around the basic idea of there was the 3-card blocks and then a core set, and the rotation would be kind of around those cores and stuff like that. They kind of changed that out eventually with the 2 oldest ones. And they've been trying to evolve it up until now, in which and this happens every fall, the sets will be legal until a certain point until you're in early fall. And right now, we've gone to a 3-year instead of a 2-year on standard. So originally, in fall of this year, early fall 2023, Innistrad Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, Kamigawa Neon Destiny, and Streets of Capenna would have left standard. That was originally what it would have been. With everything that came out from Dominaria United to March of the Machines Aftermath would have been the next year. And then the Wilds of Eldraine, Lost Caverns of Ixalan, and the 2 unannounced sets would be the next year after that. But we've seen that with the new 3-year standard, that first set of cards, which would have gone out this year, they're going out next year. So we're not losing any cards in standard this year. Now, all those cards from all those sets, so it's going to be, with March of the Machines Aftermath being standard legal, it's going to be technically 13 products that are going to be legal until early fall 2024. Next year. 13 products. That's what you're going to build your standard off of. There are bans within there, cards that you cannot use, that are based around those sets and things that are developing. Currently, right now, only Meat Hook Massacre is banned. That's the only one. There are cards that have been banned in standard over time. Standard is the most rotating model. It is the kind of front line of a lot of tournaments and stuff. If you go to a lot of tournaments, you tend to have standard play based on that. So, there have been a lot of different standard decks, and this big change to it is pretty big. There have been minor changes, basically. The idea that it was a 2-year rotation period was always in kind of existence up until now. The format of that change the rotation has changed as the format of Magic changed, as they went from rather being three sets in a block and a core set to kind of anything to very simple. They altered it a lot. So that's standard. That's one of the big ways that you're probably going to be playing Magic. And some of you out there have played standard, some of you have not. But another way of playing is, of course, modern. Modern is a big one that gets played. And what modern is back in the day, in 8th edition, the card format changed. So the card frame altered to what is called the modern card frame in 8th edition Magic the Gathering. Anything from 8th edition on is considered modern. So, there are some exceptions to these kind of things as they're built. And for the deck construction, it's the standard deck construction. Again, there are some things like that have to be mentioned, like Relentless Rats, which say that you can have more than 4 in a deck. Hey, they can be more than 4 in a deck. There are other things that are time-shifted cards. Cards from Planeswalker decks, buy box promos are all legal in the format. Cards in the Masterpieces set are not. Modern Horizons 2, the new Lord of the Rings sets that's coming out this later on this year from when this video comes out are all going to be legal in Modern. So the Modern Masters series, all those are there. Now, there are some, there's a big list of legal sets you can find, and there are some things which are banned in this. Of course, the banning comes in from some of the basic banned cards, which just happen to be banned in a lot of things. So, anyway, they have a ban list. It is updated as of March. March 7th, 2022 is the last large update to it, and you can check out the list online, but things like Oko, Thief of Crowns, Uru, Titan of Nature's Wrath, Skull Clamp, Sensei's Divining Top, they're all banned for Modern. But there's a list. But other than that, Modern is just a set that has a little bit more oomph to it. It grows. Every time there's a new set, it's added to Modern, and certainly there is a Modern ban list, but the oldest cards aren't in here yet. So we still have a little bit of a selected list. Then there is Pioneer. Pioneer goes from Return to Ravnica on. So Pioneer, though, was originally kind of something that developed in along with Magic Online, but has become more of a thing in physical space too. But for any core set from Return to Ravnica and expansions from there are Pioneer legal. Pioneer came about in 2019. It's not as popular as some of the others. It does have a standard construction like any else. Return to Ravnica is much farther after 8th edition, so it's much smaller things. Exclusives like in the Welcome decks 2016 and 2017 are technically legal in here. It's core sets and expansions since then. They also do have a banned list similar to the things. Both cards, well, two of the cards I mentioned, Oko and Uru, are both on the ban list. So, again, Pioneer originally began on Magic the Gathering online, has kind of gotten a following in physical, because it can be, you know, that's basically the simplicity of it. And the important thing to... all right, blow my nose again for a second. There was a constructed format that was kind of around this in 2022, which is Arena's version of Pioneer Explorer. It's supposed to be non-rotating, where the core sets and expansions for Return to Ravnica are illegal, but it is a little bit more... The difference Explorer is different than the other format, Historic, which I'll talk about on Arena, is that Explorer doesn't use any of the digital-only or alchemy cards. So Explorer and Historic are different, as one doesn't use the stuff that makes it Arena only. The thing is, Explorer could be played in physical space. You just have to know what cards are available on Arena. That's the entire thing about it. So it's meant to be a version of Pioneer in Arena, but Arena doesn't have access to all those cards. So, yeah. It's avoiding a lot of those digital-only stuff and things like that that have been there. Same standard deck construction. The Arena has a max deck size of 250 cards, is an important thing to note just about that. Alright, so then we're going to talk about the Eternal formats, as those are the basic constructed formats. Let's start with Type 1, the Eternal format known as Vintage. Vintage, and you'll hear the word Legacy, are oftentimes compared to each other, but they are technically different. They are originally were based on each other. It was Type 1, Type 1.5, but Vintage itself and Legacy have split since then. So, Vintage is allowed to use pretty much almost all printed cards. You're not allowed to use Eggcorn cards. Eggcorn cards are the cards that either have an Eggcorn stamp for the latest unset, because it was a black-bordered unset, or silver-bordered cards. So you can't use those. And nothing that has a non-standard magic back other than double-face cards and meld cards. So if it's got a back that's not standard, also can't use it. And there are certain cards banned from tournaments, too. There are restricted cards in Vintage. What restricted means is you're only allowed to use one copy of that, either in your deck or your sideboard. The Power 9... the incredibly powerful, ultra-rare, ultra-expensive 9 cards from the original alpha, beta, unlimited sets are technically not allowed in any other tournament format other than Vintage. Meaning because they are restricted, I could have a Mox in my Vintage deck. The basic deck building rules of every constructed exists in Vintage. It was 95 when this was kind of like determined as something separate than Standard. It was also called Classic for a while, from the late 90s. It was then kind of set up to be Vintage. 1.5 was separated from it, where 1.5, which I'll talk about, had some changes based on the banned list. But again, so the banned cards in Vintages are anything that refers to anti, anything that has a conspiracy card type, things that are considered culturally offensive nowadays, Chaos Orb, Falling Star, and Scheherazade. That's what's banned. That's it. I mean, anti is gambling. Those last three are ones that require crazy dexterity at flipping cards, Scheherazade's mini games. The conspiracy card type doesn't work unless you're playing something conspiracy. It's another thing that's also based on drafting and stuff. The culturally offensive stuff, understandable. The restricted card list is one that hasn't changed since 2019. It last in 2019. Fast Bond was removed from it, so that's not a restricted one. And things like the Moxes are on here. Time Walk, Time Vault, Time Twister, Ancestral Recall, Black Lotus, Channel, Demonic Tutor, Flash, Imperial Seer, a couple of other ones that are more modern, like Narset, Parter Veils, Karn the Great Creator. Those are newer cards that are restricted in Vintage. So think about that it's not just older ones, but things like Tolarian Academy, Treasure Cruise, it's another kind of newer one. So there's plenty of cards that are technically newer at this point in time that have gotten on there. There are plenty that are older. Certainly things like the Power 9 are restricted. And yes, as the format evolves, there are cards that are removed because there are things that either cancel it or make it that a lot of the reasons why it was restricted in the first place are not needed. The evolution of a set with a lot of newer cards and stuff like that has changed it that, yeah, Vintage even evolves there. That's why certainly things like the Power 9 are not going to be removed from the list here, and a bunch of the older cards probably not. Strip Mine, Soul Ring, things like that. No, I don't think we're going to see them removed, but certainly there have been plenty that have. You can see the list of cards online for those that have been banned and formally restricted. The banned ones, again, they're very standard for a lot of these older formats that have access to them. That banned list is going to be set. So it's the anti-cards, conspiracy cards, culture offensive cards, Chaos Orb, Falling Star, Scheherazade. That set of cards banned in anything which that group could be possibly legal in from the similar sets. Legacy. Formerly 1.5. It was with Vintage. What's different from it? Well, other than it's split from Vintage at a point in time, the big thing about it is a lot of those restricted cards are now also banned. So that's basically what it does. Is it doesn't have the restricted cards. It's just got banned cards. And the ban list is separate from Vintage. So there are certain cards that were banned in Legacy that were unbanned, and, well, you know, in between the two of them, they each have their own banned lists that have developed. Pull my nose again. It was around 97 that it was being developed. In 2004 was around the time that it split out truly and made its own thing. Originally, it was seen as something a little different than Vintage. They called it, like, it was nicknamed the poor man's Vintage, because, yes, in Vintage, I could have copies of the Power 9 in my decks. Legacy, I could not. But Legacy has had a lot more popularity now, just because the fact that it is easier to get into and things like that. And, you know, yes, technically speaking, I could spend a lot more money on my Vintage deck and get a lot cooler things. But certainly You don't need that for a good legacy deck. Standard construction. There are things that have exception ability that they say specifically on them. You can have more than 4 copies, but other than that, no silver bordered, gold bordered, non-standard card backs other than the double-faced or meld cards. Of course, it has a banned list of its own, beyond the normal banned list that is existing, you know, the dexterity cards, anti-cards, conspiracy cards, sub-game cards, and culturally sensitive cards. Those are just gone, you know, from sets and stuff. But, you know, you do get things where, again, you can check the banned list here. It's different than the restricted list that exists for Vintage. It's its own list. And so there has been stuff removed from it, like Black Vice was removed in September 2015, and certainly things have been added to the list in between there, but it exists on its own. Another newer format that came out in 2019 that is a very popular one as of right now is Pauper. It began as a Magic Online format around and kind of moved into tabletop in June of 2019. So it was another one that developed online in the Magic Online sphere and kind of came into it. What is Pauper? You can only use common cards. That's it. It's as simple as that. It's a deck of only common cards. Now, sometimes Pauper is used in conjunction with other formats. Standard Pauper, Modern Pauper, Block Constructed Pauper, things like that. You can have Pauper with other constructed formats because it is a constructed format. Magic Arena does support some of these things, so you can do kind of a Pauper there. Very small historic pool is probably the better one. There is another version of this which is a little different, which we'll talk about, but this one is just common cards that you have. The thing is, there is no common ban list for a long time, but because it is kind of in every format, there are banned cards that exist here. Other than the culturally sensitive cards, that's a big one that's banned. There's a list that is banned from all sanctioned play as of September last year. There are a couple of promotional cards that were appeared as common in those promos, but they're not considered part of Pauper. Keep in mind that Hada Freebade, Spatial Contortion, Circle of Flames have a common printing, but they're promotionals, they don't count. But other than that, things like Atog, Sinkhole, Fall of the Favor are all banned in in the format there. They don't have any restricted play, but these are the commons that you just can't use in your Pauper decks if you're going to a tournament. Again, a lot of times bans and restriction, they are made to help in playing with your friends or they're meant for tournaments mainly. Playing with your friends, that can be different, you know, but you have to know if it's banned or restricted in a tournament race, it's done for a reason. So just keep that in mind before you use anything like that then. Certainly. But, you know, you can look up the currently list that a lot of the tournaments that happen have for banned. But other than that, Pauper is an interesting thing because it's, yes, there are some expensive commons because of their popularity, but it's a common deck. It's an easy-to-play deck, an easy-to-play format. So, we're still talking about paper formats and the more common ones. Let's talk about the limited draft and then the multiplayer one, because these are the other current ways that tend to be played. First off is sealed deck games, which is my personal favorite when it comes to going to tournaments. What is sealed deck? Well, sealed deck is me going to a tournament place. I usually did these at pre-releases, but there are events at major tournaments, Grand Prix, Friday Night Magics. You go there, you get 6 booster packs, and then construct a deck from those packs, and just add basic lands that are usually provided. That's it. You construct a deck out of 6 booster packs. Those cards are sealed. You don't look at them. You have to construct it then and there. Your deck must be at least 40 cards. You can have as many basic lands as you desired. Any cards that aren't in your deck can be are considered part of your sideboard. traditionally you use about somewhere between 15 to 20 of your cards will be lands, depending on what you kind of want to build for your deck and what you need. So there will be a big chunk of your deck which will be sideboards. And remember, you have 6 booster packs. That's a pretty decent amount. That's 90 cards to look at, traditionally. So you're going to have a larger card pool than the other major format that when it comes to tournaments, booster drafts. It makes it that's a little easier for things, but the thing is, because you're, rather than a little, both booster draft and sealed deck have the same kind of thing of like, you have to just play with what you have. This booster draft, yes, you have less cards, but you traditionally have a little bit better selection of cards. This one in the sealed deck, you just have to deal with what you have when you're kind of building. So, catch-22 on the rest of them. But speaking of that, booster draft is the other major format. It's a draft format where you traditionally get 3 booster packs per player in the current draft format. 8 players in a draft, normally. You can do it with fewer, but 8 is the number needed for sanctioned Magic drafts, as the major do. And then, again, basic lands are provided. The idea is that at once, the 8 players, we'll use the 8 players as standard, open up the packs, take 1 card from it, put it face down, and then pass it over. And you do that until the pack runs out. You are allowed to check what you've picked up, what 15 cards you took out of that thing. Then you open the next pack, do it again. You'll end up with 45 cards in your pile. Then you build a deck. 40-card deck, any number of basic land. A lot of draft decks, they suggest 17 or 18 lands is a good amount. That you're using half the cards you drafted. Because again, you're picking out a card, passing it along, doing this over and over again. You're going to only get like 2 cards from the pack that you opened before it disappears. And so you're hoping to get a good combination of stuff that helps you build this. But you're getting, a bunch of cards from all of them. There are 2 other types of drafts which I can mention here. Chaos Draft, which is a lot like the Booster Draft, except rather than just 3 packs of 1 set, which that's what I have to say. Those 2 formats traditionally are 3 packs of the same set. The sealed deck, the booster draft. Now, the sealed deck can have variations depending on things. It could be that you're honestly doing different, like if you're doing like a block, you could have 3 from one set of the block, 3 from another set of the block, things like that have variations in the sealed deck. But traditionally, it's 6 packs from that set. Chaos Draft or Booster Draft is very similar. Traditionally, it's 3 packs from the set you're drafting. Chaos Draft changes it completely that you have 3 random packs. Basically, draw 3 packs from anywhere, you can have them. And the thing is, everyone else can also have just random sets of packs for the Chaos Sixth. You can each have different sets of packs. And you've got 3, you go through them, you draft it as normal. Everybody gets 3 different ones possibly. It's very chaotic that way. A different type of draft, which is much less popular, it was one of the early ones, was the Rochester Draft, where 1 booster pack is open at a time. Instead of every player opening their pack, the cards are laid out on the table. You're given 20 seconds to review your choices, and then the players take turns picking cards at a time to build their deck. The thing about this one is it takes a lot longer, but people have more information about what's going into everybody's decks. Yeah, the draft length is really the problem, the Rochester Draft. But otherwise, it is a different format of draft if you're interested in it. And yes, it's going to take a lot longer because 8 people at... Yes. Draft ends up being kind of... 3 times 8, it would be 24 times that you do this draft of lay out 15 cards, take a look. I, who laid it out, take 1, go around the board, do that until we're out, and then repeat that for like the next person's pack and go around all the packs to do my packs again and then my packs again. It takes a long while. It would be interesting because you kind of know what everybody has and what the cards are kind of laid out and stuff like that. But still, you know, it's a different draft format. Jumpstart is a format that you can find. How do you find that? You buy Jumpstart packs. There have been a couple of Jumpstart sets. Effectively, what Jumpstart sets are real Jumpstart sets, because there's been ones that are less real Jumpstart sets. Cough, cough. But anyway, the idea is that these are 20 card packs that each have a theme to them. You open up 2 of these packs, throw them together. You got a 40 card deck you can play. That's Jumpstart. So each person can take 2 different of these packs. I think the packs are labeled with what they are for Jumpstart. You throw them together, figure it out, play it. Jumpstart's pretty fun. It's a great way of doing it. It's specifically a format that you require Jumpstart cards to play, unfortunately. You could redo these things and just have a pack of like all your Jumpstart packs separated up into something and ready to just break them apart each time. It's possible, you know, so you can reuse them afterwards because it's just taking 2. And, you know, you could take turns taking them, or you have multiple copies of things and kind of make it interesting. But, so the Jumpstart format's an interesting one. Two-Headed Giant is one of the main multiplayer formats, and is the one that is DCI sanctioned. All these ones I've been talking about here are DCI sanctioned. Let me let you know that. That means they are official games. The DCI being the kind of Duelist Convention International, the competitive body for Magic the Gathering. So, all those are sanctioned, meaning they are played under DCI. Anyway, Two-Headed Giant. Well, it's team-based. You have teams of 2. Each player is seated on the right of each team in a primary player. The player seated on the left is a secondary player. So, right is primary, left is secondary. You have a shared life total of 30. It's a constructed format, so they are constructed decks, just like any other constructed decks. And honestly, you can again have formats like whatever constructed format you're playing. You know, again, minimum 60 cards. Must be able to shuffle it. You could probably do like modern Two-Headed Giant, legacy Two-Headed Giant, standard Two-Headed Giant. Again, some of these formats layer on top of each other. That's the important thing about it. The big thing here is you can review each other's hands and strategies at any time. You as a team take turns rather than each player take turns. So one set of Two-Headed Giant players would take their turn and then move on to the next ones. So you take your turns at the same time. Your resources, cards to hand, mana, and so on, are not shared. So that's an important thing to say. So your life is shared. You can talk about what you can play, but your hand, your resources, poison counters are also shared too, because poison counters is another way to win and stuff like that. So you can reach each other, but you can't manipulate each other's cards and permanents. Team who plays first skips their draw step. It's using the shared combat team rules, which basically means that you're defending together. You don't lose as an individual, you lose as a team. So, yes. It means that you're not attacking, you're attacking both players when you attack, not just one of the players. So they both can defend. So that's an important thing to remember. Damage and loss of life and life gaining do happen to players individually. So if there's things that mention multiple players, it would apply both times. Like if something has, you know, something that targets a player, it happens individually. But it can have a result that would be both of them. Yeah. Anyway. What's the thing here? Yes. So yeah. the game can be played with multiple teams as long as they're two-player teams. But they do say for each team beyond the second, the team's starting life total is increased by 15, and the number of points encounters required to lose is increased by 5. Okay, so this is if you're playing more than two-headed giants, so teams of more than two. I'm sorry, that's the way to say it. You can do three-headed giant, four-headed giant, but it increases the life by 15, poison counters required by 5. So, yes, the poison counters are actually increased anyway. I want to know what's the poison counters that you need. I have to check how that is. Anyway, so, yep. It's basically attacking player, defending player are both groups. So, anyway. Sorry, taking a breath here. So the thing is, Domineering has changed the rules for Two-Headed Giant that you are technically attacking one of the players or the others. But the idea is that you're attacking a Planeswalker or players specifically, or targeting a specific one. But I believe they still defend together, which I have to make sure. Yeah. Each player can have their creatures block when a creature attacks one of its players. So your team isn't the one being targeted. I just wanted to make sure of that in my brain. Again, there's a lot of formats. It's going to cost me some time to think about some of these. A little few of them here to remember exact details after I went over all of these to try to get them out here for you guys here. The idea is all the monsters on either side of the player's field can block, but I'm still targeting one of those players. And that's what matters, is you're still technically targeting one of those players when it comes to things, or a Planeswalker under that player. Yes, either player can use their blockers to defend. But, you know, it matters for targeting stuff, attacking player, defending player stuff. There's an actual target of stuff. So, yeah. And things that would apply to both of them would apply twice. If something would have each player loses X life, you would lose X life twice because both players would be targeted by it. And then the total life total would go down twice. Or opponents would do the same thing. So I'm going to talk about the casual constructed formats now before I dive in, and the limited draft formats of casual. Maybe we'll just hit all the casual stuff before I go into the Magic Online, Magic Arena stuff. Maybe. We'll maybe throw it out here. But there's a lot of constructed formats that are very casual that exist that are very interesting. And I can talk about a bunch of them here. 3-card blind is a very interesting one. You have an organizer who gets a deck list from everybody, and then calculates in a round-robin tournament who plays who. Well, your deck consists of 3 cards. You start with all 3 cards in your hand. You place your cards revealed. You do not, when you draw cards, you do not lose the game for being unable to draw. Random effects are most beneficial to the opponent of the owner's card generating it. What does this mean? If I control a card that says flip a coin, whatever would be most valuable for my opponent is what happens. And then, so you play it out. For each win, you get 3 points. For each draw, you get 1 point. And, yeah, you have to build a hand that supplies the mana to do whatever it is to be able to win the game. It's an interesting format. It's possible, 3-card blind. I'm not going to talk about it much more than that. Ancient. It's a casual constructed format. What's so special about Ancient? Well, it only allows original bordered cards. Meaning that the only cards you're allowed to play in Ancient are from Alpha to Onslaught. Remember I talked about in 8th edition, where the modern format of cards came about, and that was modern on from there? Ancient's the opposite. It's anything from before there. So, there are some exceptions, though, that can be added in here to complete stuff. What would be called completed cycles that were done in the more modern format. What does this mean? Well, a good example is there was the part of the set of fetch lands that were there in Onslaught were technically completed in Zendikar and their fetch lands. So, combined together, the Zendikar fetch lands plus Onslaught fetch lands are considered a single cycle. Meaning, the fetch lands from Zendikar are legal in Ancient. So, Ancient doesn't evolve, it's a set format. There's another similar format called that in Netherlands, but that's different. We're not going to talk about that. I don't have any information other than it's mentioned. So there is like a smaller format that's got a similar name. But in general, it's anything that if you want to play with a bunch of cards, if you have a load of older cards and you want to just build some decks from that and be before the modern format, play some Ancient. It's an interesting set. Arch Enemy. Arch Enemy is a fun one that I did want to definitely dive into because it's one that has been out there. There have only been 2 Arch Enemy products produced that give us these scheme cards. Okay, we need the scheme cards to play. So what it is, Arch Enemy, you have one player who is the Arch Enemy that plays against a team of opponents. The Arch Enemy starts with 40 life, always takes the first turn, and has a second deck of oversized powerful scheme cards in a command zone. The opposing team takes turns just as simultaneous, just like Two-Headed Giant, but each one of them has their own separate life totals. Any teammate can block an attacker declared by the Arch Enemy, regardless of the player that's being attacked. That's also another important thing. You can protect each other. It's good to keep your other allies in play. Arch Enemy wins if all the players are eliminated. Opposing player wins if even one left manages to defeat the Arch Enemy. So basically, at the pre-combat main phase, the Arch Enemy draws a scheme card, puts it in their command zone, sets it into motion, does its thing that says the card is. Some of them resolve, some of them get abandoned at a certain point in time. That's it. So, Arch Enemy has more life, and it has these scheme cards, which your deck has to at least have 20 cards. 2 of a limit. So you can't have more than 2 of any scheme card also, which is an important thing to mention about it. My nose is so... So certainly, you could have repeats of scheme cards, but just have 2 maximum in them and have at least 20 in your scheme deck. When a scheme is finished up, when it's abandoned, resolved, if it's an ongoing one and it ends up at the bottom of the scheme deck. So the scheme deck is only shuffled once, and when something would be discarded, when we're finished, resolved, abandoned, or anything like that, it goes to the bottom of the deck at that point in time. So certainly, there could be orders changing that way, but generally speaking, your schemes are going to go in the same order. The schemes are very powerful. They give the Arch Enemy very powerful abilities. So honestly speaking, you want enough players to take them on. It's a very interesting and fun kind of version of the game. There are some variations, which we'll talk about. The Arch Enemy Nicol Bolas, which is the second one, added some new rules and things like that, allowing your allies to help block you versus the Arch Enemy, things like that. And it evolved the format a little bit much. It's had some popularity. It is probably not as much as Plane Chase or Commander, but it's there. So Arch Enemy might be something you want to check out. The Arch Enemy and Arch Enemy Nicol Bolas are the 2 sets. Archon is basically a Commander variant. We'll talk about Commander, but we'll mention this one here. It's a 1v1 format. It's focused on competitive blades. Archon was kind of managed by an Archon Council, a group of 5 people elected from the group. It's kind of a casual format. They kind of wanted to change and evolve the format. They wanted different things to be legal and illegal in the format kind of thing. It uses the normal Commander rules for the Commander variant a lot of times, but it's a 2-player game. Your life totals are 20. The Commander damage is ignored. The thing is, in this one, rather than the normal min-max deck size of Commander being 100, if you're playing Archon, the minimum deck size is 100, but there's no maximum deck size. So that's an important part of Archon, is you could have a larger deck than 100 in it. There are sideboard rules for that one. You can only have up to one card in your sideboard if it's your companion, and the card may not enter the game unless through companion ability. And each player designates primary commanders or commanders. They're allowed to designate other cards as commander for each match. Primary Highlanders are highlighted. Yes. So, again, it's an interesting things. There are some things banned as commanders or partners or companions. And there is a entire server and group that is dedicated to building this format. It's a singleton deck like Commander. You can only have one copy of a card. No commander damage. It's a variation on Commander you might be interested in. Assassin's an interesting one. It's a multiplayer format. So what Assassin is you're randomly assigned a target to defeat. Okay. It basically means, like, at the beginning of it, you draw something and you find a person that you have to defeat. You're free to attack anybody you want. Victory is not determined solely by who the last player is, but who manages to take out the most marks over the course of the game. You score points by delivering the finishing blow to the assigned target, as well as being the last survivor. If I defeat another target, their mark becomes mine. So then I got a second mark. So then if I defeat that target, hey, I've got a new target to defeat, more points to score. There you go. So it's basically everybody's trying to assassinate each other in a chain that kind of established the initial part of it. And, you know, as someone's eliminated, you know, it keeps going like that. So it's an interesting kind of like points-based, you assassinate people for points. And being the last one surviving does give you some points. But the more people you shank, it could be someone that lost. If they took out multiple players that were their targets, well, they could have more points than you surviving if you didn't take any targets. Auction's a interesting one. It's a casual multiplayer format that basically a bunch of decks of comparable strength are put together by whoever's running the tournament. The deck lists are provided to the players. Then the auctioneer selects a deck, and the provisioning players bid life points and hand sizes below the previous stated value. So hand is before life, so if it'd be like 7 cards, 1 life, 6 cards, 25 life, and that's how you talk about it. The lowest bidder is awarded the deck. So the normal starting bid is 7 cards, 20 life. That's a starting bid. It's the basics for a game. But I could bid, I want to start with 6 cards in my hand and 19 life. It's a lower bid. I can lower both these numbers and kind of compete in this bidding format. Now, granted, there are variations of this, sometimes starting with higher numbers, like 8 and 25 or 8 and 30, because you're going to go lower numbers. So it's sort of like the person that just took whatever deck was last might end up with an advantage of, I've got 8 cards in my opening hand and 30 life. Yeah. Different formats can be played with auction. You could do an auction with Commander. So you'd probably start with 8 cards, 50 life, or even 9 cards, 60 life. The bidding concludes for each deck. The person that wins it gets it. Every player starts with the number of cards in hand and life total according to the winning bid. So it's an auction for these decks. And then depending on the situation, a tournament format is built together. And, you know, you just have to play with these pre-constructed decks. It's an interesting concept. Baroque. So, effectively what this is Baroque is a format that all cards listed on Scryfall for a value of equal or less than $1 in price are legal in Baroque. Scryfall being a search engine for Magic cards. It's scryfall.com if you want to check it out yourself. the format is legally updated with a standard rotation, which means, again, prices shift throughout the year. But every time the standard rotates, which is, again, fall. Remember, we're talking about that fall time when standard rotates. Like right now, we're building up to that, like, it would go from like 8 to 4 sets in standard. When it rotates out, when a new set's coming in, when it would go to 9 sets with the original one, now it's a little bit more. When that standard rotation occurs, which again, it technically is occurring this year in fall, but there's no actual rotation out because of the change in it. But then it looks at all the prices that are $1 or less at that point in time. Those are legal in the format, and you can look that up. So a card that you've been playing, if it becomes popular in something, it might leave the format. But again, it's a standard construction, 60 card, no max deck size unless you can shuffle it, 15 card sideboard, no extra cards unless it's basic lands or something that says you're allowed to put something extra like Relentless Rats. There are no banned cards in this format because they're dollar cards. This was introduced in 2019. It's had a little bit of popularity. It might be something you might be interested in checking out. A Baroque game, which is just using cheaper cards. Block Party is a format. It's a construction format. It's a little different than Block Your Constructed or Build Your Own Block. What this is, every player chooses your favorite block of 3 sets, and you build a deck constructed from that block. But each player can have a different favorite block. So I could have the Mirrodin block, someone else could have the Onslaught block, someone could have some Ravnica block, someone could have the Macrania Mask block. And then the players build a deck doing normal construction rules, including ban lists for whatever format you're playing. Honestly, depends on like the block rules. Most likely it's Legacy, Vintage, Modern. If you're all doing Modern ones, you could do Modern list. But since blocks don't exist anymore, it is a definite thing that you can't really get new of. So the blocks aren't really changing anymore. But it's an interesting concept for a format. And it's a fairly casual, nice one. But speaking of that, let's move on. I'll keep going and opening up these ones here. We'll get through a lot of them. Build Your Own Block is a set. What is this? This is another version of block format, though what it would be is you choose the first set from any block, the second set from any block, and the third set from any block, and build your own block, and use a constructed deck using those 3 sets. This is another version of this block format, though I'm like taking like if I want the first set of the Loran block, a set of the Legions block, and you know some stuff from Mirrodin, and kind of interact them together. It's an interesting concept that kind of builds on stuff and allows you to put together some very interesting sets of stuff. Basically, you choose 3 sets, you use it to make a block model, put it together. A very interesting one to put together and very fun. And they there have been uses that have been like they specifically give blocks or sets that you can use for each of your 3 block lists. To restrict it in some format tournaments, it has been used in. So it would basically be like choose from this list, choose from this, choose from that list. You could do something similar with a bunch of your own friends, or you could just be like, hey, choose 3 sets and build a deck using those 3 sets. You know, that'd be kind of cool to do too. Build Your Own Standard is a very similar one to that one. You basically get your own similar environment. Normally you choose a core set and then 2 blocks, and that's your standard. That's it. A core set and 2 blocks, and that's your standard, because that's what traditional standard was. Standard has changed a little bit now, so you could change it to be more of like choose 12 sets, and that's your standard now. It would have been 8 sets up until like a couple of weeks ago when they changed it standard. So you could take either of those 3 formats for building your own standard. The traditional one was more a core set and 2 blocks, but certainly with the evolution of how standard has been, you could build a different standard from like choose 8 sets, or the new choose 12 sets. Captain. There are two technical captain formats. We're going to talk about the Captains of Magic the Gathering first, which has a lot of influence from Commander, Oathbreaker, Canadian Highlander. So, you do choose a legendary creature or planeswalker to be your captain, and it follows the same commander rules. Your captain follows the same rules as a commander, that you can play it from your commander zone or your captain zone or whatever. It costs 2 extra each time you have to change it from additional things. There is no mandatory color identity for your captain. So, you may run any card not on the banned list regardless of its color identity. It includes silver bordered cards. It's a very general one. The ban list is maintained by the format's creators. It's a 60-card deck. It's a singleton deck, like Commander, and you start with 20 life. So it's a very similar. You can look it up, the Captains of Magic the Gathering. I think their website is... yeah, Captain MTG. You'd find the rules for it, basically. It's a different way of playing it. Interesting. The Captain Democratic format, well, that was something that is basically dead now, but it was, what happened was there was some controversy with Secret Lair drops Walking Dead, that a bunch of people didn't like it and tried to make their own version of the Commander rules and bans. Missed the sneeze. Oh. I have the fan on, too. So basically, there was a Discord server that was started with a democratic thing to vote, what would kind of be banned and stuff, to get rid of things like that, because there was a call for a good number of the group to ban this thing, but there was a lot of issues with the entire thing, trying to control it. The Captain format was basically Commander with different banning. It existed for a while, for a couple of years. It's basically dead because the format can't evolve anymore. It fell apart. You choose your captain. It has to adhere to the color identity. It was a 100-card deck. You had 40-card life. Captain's in the command zone. It's the same based rules for a commander. There was definitely a lot of banned cards here. And they had a ban list and stuff. And there was just a governance thing that was a lot different. There you go. Challenger decks was a way to play. It was a way that you would purchase. It was something that was for sale, which there was a Challenger deck series. It was basically, you played against the deck itself. It's a PvE. The deck would fight you. It had some things like elite creatures and sorceries. It wasn't very popular, didn't go very far, but if you want to go purchase a Challenger deck, there are some in existence. There were a bunch that came out over the years. So yeah. Special elite creatures and sorceries. It had its own rules for running against it. It went extinct. But it's a thing you can still find Challenger decks, probably. They might be more expensive. Chaos Magic. This was supposed to be something that was like an early form of Plane Chase, almost. So, it's a very casual way of play. And what it is there's a Chaos deck that consists of 20 to 30 cards selected by at least some of the players involved. The player who goes first is the Chaos player. Before they untap at the beginning of their turn, they flip over the Chaos deck on the table, and it's in effect until the player flips a different card after a full series of turns. So, if I'm the person that's the Chaos player, I flip over the card until it's my turn again. That's an effect. It can't be affected by spells or abilities. Any player may use any abilities granted by the card. If it has a specific effect, each player immediately resolves that. If the Chaos player, me, is eliminated from the game, the person whose turn would be next becomes the Chaos player then. There were cards that would be used in there were things that allow a lot of special abilities. The examples would be like Armageddon, Destroy All Lands. There's a Kamuno Master Yamabushi, which allows players to repeatedly spend mana to do damage, Howling Mine, which allows every player to draw extra cards. Because remember, this is before untap, so it's untap, upkeep, draw in the beginning of the game. So this is right at the beginning of the turn. So, like, even me, during my untap step, I would get it as the Chaos player. So Chaos Magic, interesting one. It's kind of like Plane Chase, except with a deck instead. Commander! It's one of the Highlander series, which we'll talk about specifically, the rest of a bunch of other Highlander things, but it's Elder Dragon Highlander EDH. It's a format that's been around for quite some time. It's very popular now, gained its big popularity. It's the basic free-for-all. It's a multiplayer game, most than anything. So the idea is that it is an eternal format, meaning I use old cards. You have a legendary creature, which is your commander. It's free-for-all multiplayer. 2-player games are also popular. You have 40 life. You have your commander, which is your legendary creature in your command zone. It determines the colors of your deck. And other than basic lands, each card in the deck must have a different name. There is a ban list for it. Yeah. Put my nose again. I'm going to admit, most of you out there probably know Commander. There's the command tax for bringing your commander back out of the zone. You can lose from life or get 21 damage from a single commander over the course of the game. Again, it was originally named Elder Dragon Highlander because it was a format of the Highlander series, and Elder Dragon because guess where the legends came from? The Legends set with the Elder Dragons like Chromium and Nicol Bolas. And, you know, it grew in format, grew in popularity, and eventually became what we know today called Commander, which I'm pretty sure Wizards honestly named it Commander. So, honestly, it's an eternal format like Legacy and Vintage, but it has its own banned list, and Eggcorn cards are not allowed. Conspiracy card types are also banned, though other cards from the Conspiracy set are not, and work well in Commander because of the multiplayer focus, honestly. Just the Conspiracy type cards themselves. And there is, generally speaking, some kind of, like, things that are banned and stuff, so... Commander. It has its own rules and stuff there, too. Take a drink. And, abilities to bring cards from outside the game into the game, like wishes, do not function in Commander without prior agreement on what cards can be brought into the game with them. And then they function as normal after that. So, again, also, Culture Offensive banned anti-cards, and a list of cards are also banned, like the Power 9 from Commander. So, yep. There you go. Anyway. And Luthi the Spell Chaser is also banned from Ikoria. I think, yep. Commander. You should know it. Most of you that are listening to this should probably know it, or at least heard of it. So, there's also Dual Commander, which is a format. It's a variation of Commander. Now, when we talk about Variation Commander, you at least, if you didn't have an idea, you've got a little bit of one. The differences here are it's made to be 1 versus 1 more than anything, rather than multiplayer. You only start with 20 life. It's traditional rules of the Magic Gathering game, 1 commander or 2 commanders with the partner ability, the 98 cards. The Mulligan system is the same for sanctioned formats. Construction rules of the consolidated multiplayer. It's just the main ways the decks are built are basically dual commander. If I'm building a dual commander deck, I'm planning on a 1v1 kind of thing rather than multiplayer. It's just a different way to build a deck. That's really the main thing is, and then you are doing 20 life. Other than that, the rules aren't really that different, and it's very similar to a Magic Online format, which we'll talk about 1v1 Commander in the future. Flavor Town is a casual multiplayer format. So, what it is it is basically flavor centric. This is a weird format. So, it's a basic form, 60 cards, singleton constructed deck. Okay, meaning again, 60 cards, one of each card, all black bordered cards, and some silver bordered or acorn stamp cards are allowed. The ones that are allowed have flavored matter cards or artist or art matter cards. Okay. Cards involving dexterity, speech, clothing, reminder text, activities, or stuff outside the game are excluded still. Alright. So what it is everybody gets a My First Tome emblem. My First Tome is a card from a unset. It was 1 mana tap. Say the flavored text of a card in your hand. If the opponent guesses the card's name, you may reveal that card. If you... the opponent guesses the name, you reveal the card. If you do, the opponent guessed wrong, you draw a card. The only difference is the emblem says 1 mana without a tapping. Say the name of flavor, opponent guesses it, reveal the card. If they guess wrong, you draw a card. When you activate this ability, you may not activate it again until your next untapped step. So it's a once per turn still, but everybody gets this emblem. It's an emblem. You can't get rid of it. It's basically a draw emblem that you could be like, do you know my flavor text? And it's assumed to use the it's assumed that the non-standard English variants are going to use the English language equivalent for the set. So you could use a version of a card that is not in English, but if you are reading the flavor or using flavored matter-based things, you have to use the English language variant of it and have to say that. So there's a lot of draw silliness and some silliness, and, you know, everything has a flavor text, especially now that Dungeons & Dragons Adventures of the Forgotten Realm introduced basic lands with flavor text. So now everything has to have flavor text on it. That's the only thing. That's the restricted, is each card must have it, including basic lands. Since now we have basic lands with flavor text. It's a silly kind of thing. Folk Commander. Folk Commander is Commander, except the price. Your Commander deck can only be cost $35 or 25 EU. So its price is limited, excluding basic lands and deck sleeves. Just the price of all the other cards are there. The only thing that is the way when you do a tournament for Folk Commander is, according to the rules, if you did play with a deck, the current price of Magic cards. Effectively, if it's $35, every card that I'm using in my deck, save for basic lands, because probably that's all the lands I'm going to use, honestly, most of the time, have to cost a total of $35. Use cheap cards. There's a lot of commons that are like 5 cents, honestly. If your deck does clearly exceeds that price, you will be asked to basically sell the deck at the game end. That's the risk that apparently is part of this. So it's a weird risk of this game. That's basically the way. It's like, oh, you got to sell your deck. This is clearly more expensive than $35. There's a lot of cards that are goddamn cheap. And so, like, you don't have to really buy a lot of new cards and stuff. I mean, it's an interesting idea. Commander precons, you know, they work well with them and stuff, too, a lot of times. There really isn't... Playing proxies is used a little bit because of the, you know, funness of it. And, you know, there really isn't a lot of banning because, honestly, you're not really getting a lot of expensive cards. It's an interesting way of playing. A format which gained surprising popularity this year is Forgetful Fish. So this is a format that started in 96-97. And and basically, let's see who it was. It was the... a group, which I can figure out, the Ristic Studies, Ristic Studies talked about this format and went into depth about it and its history. I'm not going to do that. But basically, they talked about it and gained popularity. And the card Dan Dan, which is formatted around, gained 1,000% price gain. Meaning it went from dirt cheap to like $11 for a while. Now it's back down to like $3? Sorry, the heat's just kind of weird. So I'm turning my fan on. Basically, just to get a summary of this, Dan Dan's from Arabian Nights. I have Dan Dan. I didn't know it went up in price. I have a bunch of them. They're not good. Dan Dan is it can attack unless an opponent has islands in play. It's destroyed immediately anytime you have no islands in play. So what it is both players that are playing this share the same blue deck and even the same graveyard. So there's an 80 card deck where there's 6 copies of Memory Lapse, which is a counter target spell. If that spell's countered this way, put on the top of its owner's library instead of the player's graveyard. And then 10 copies of Dan Dan, which are the fish. So Forgetful Fish is the Memory Lapse plus that. So after you have those 16 cards, the rest of the deck is just blue instants or sorceries that take advantage of the top deck, the stack, and the fish. The only effect that can damage is the Dan Dan. So that's a big thing about it. Dan Dan is the only thing that can damage things. So you start 20 life, you draw a card of 7 hands, you discard at the end step. If you have more than 7 cards, you lose the game if you can't... and they can lose the game if you draw from an empty deck. So if you are the last one to draw a card and it's an empty deck, you lose the game. Again, Memory Lapse might put something on top that keeps you alive or something, but... so the hands are dealt out like a game of poker, with one player taking a card, the other player taking a card, going back and forth until you have 7 cards. The person who drew first is the active player. You share a graveyard, so if there's anything that mentions a graveyard, it's both of yours. The owner at the time is simply who's the caster. There are mulligans, but basically there's a provided deck list on the mtgfandom.com Wikipedia. But you could basically create any kind of like deck list you wanted for a Dan Dan deck. They give a good example of one with a lot of cards from a lot of time periods, and it's an interesting one. 6 Memory Lapses, 10 Dan Dans, and a bunch of other things. You need lands, sorceries, instants. You know, it's an interesting format. It's an interesting idea for 2-player Magic. I honestly find it very hilarious in a way. Let's keep talking about the constructed formats here. I think I'll finish up the constructed formats, talk about the online stuff, and then we'll move on to limited draft casual and finish up Magic Arena, and then talk the remaining multiplayer. No, I'll do multiplayer with the limited draft before I do Arena. Frontier! So, what Frontier does is it's kind of like Modern. Why? Because it's a set. So, when Magic 2015 came out, there was another update to the card frame. It wasn't as vast and different as the 8th edition card frame change, but all cards printed since have used the M15 card frame. So, what Frontier does is, use any cards since M15 card frame. Pioneer, on the other hand, which is a very simpler one, it kind of replaces this. Because Pioneer comes from Return to Ravnica and onward. And so, yes, M15, which came out July of 2014, which is, when was that in comparison to Return to Ravnica came out in earlier. So that's the thing is, Return to Ravnica came out before then. So yes. Basically, Frontier is the exact same block as Pioneer, except you don't have the Return to Ravnica block and you don't have the Theros block. That's it. So, it is another format, and there's a bunch of legal sets, and, you know, there's no ban list, but it is a format that you can play. It just doesn't exist at most because, technically speaking, your Frontier deck is also going to be a Pioneer deck. You're just not playing with the Return to Ravnica and Theros blocks. That's it. Without those 2 blocks, you're still playing it. And the core sets that were kind of around those. Gentry. Gentry is a casual constructed format. So what does this mean? Well, I'm using all the same card pool as Standard normally, but I'm restricting it in Gentry. So it's a standard card pool, but I'm only allowed to have up to 15 uncommons, and then 4 rares or mythic rares, either in my main deck or sideboard for both of those. Meaning my uncommons have to be 15 within my main deck and my sideboard. My rares have to be 4, rare or mythic, in main deck and sideboard. And for rares, there can only be one. Rares and mythic rares, there can only be 1 of each. So it's a different way of playing. It kind of spreads out that you have to be limited on your rares and uncommons and stuff. It's an interesting way of playing. It's very popular in Europe, and there's good players about it. So, honestly, if you want to look into it, it's an interesting way of playing. Highlander! Of course, Highlander is a format that... One of the main formatters of Highlander is... Commander. Why is it called Highlander? Because there can only be one. That's what it is. That's any Highlander... a constructed... way of doing Magic is a singleton game format. Now, not all singleton formats are Highlanders, technically. They were derived from this basic idea of Highlander, and there's a lot of derivatives of them, derived things from them. But basically, it's the idea that you start with one of any card. So, the basic Highlander deck construction, no 2 cards with the same English name except basic lands. That's a kind of defining moment. Is if cards are of different languages, they still count because if it's translated in English, it's the same name. There are variants, but between the variants, some have at least 100 cards, others have 60 cards, and 15-card sideboards. Some cards are banned in formats. Some have no sideboards normally. The basic way a lot of these use is a point list. What does a point list mean? Well, a lot of these Highlander formats, rather than have a ban list, have a point list. What it means is, I have a certain number of points I can spend. And then there's a list of cards that have pools of point value. So, things like Moxes might have a certain amount of point value, where, like, if an Ancestral Recall has a point value of 7. That's in Canadian Highlander. I'll talk about that. While the 5 original Mox have 3 point value apiece, meaning that, like, if I can have up to 9 points, I could have 3 Moxes in my deck. They'd be 3 different Moxes. Or 1 Ancestral Recall and maybe something smaller. So that's a basically way that it gets rid of these restricted ideas. You have points, and depending on the format, it gives for various point values for these things. They're assigned and called. There's a simplified singleton. It's a version of Highlander that uses standard, modern, legacy, or vintage. Construct deck building rules. Card is no 100 card minimum. It's just that you're using single cards for standard, modern, legacy, vintage, and constructed. That's a version of Highlander. Australian Highlander is the 7-point Highlander. It's a primary. It primarily uses the vintage band list. But it has, like, the point system using that vintage band list. And you have 7 points of cards in a 60-card deck. Canadian Highlander, it shares most of the band list with vintage. And restricted list with an evaluated card per card. You have 10 points on a 100-card deck. So there are some bans in these, but the restricted are point value kind of things. It was originally developed in '99. It has some well-known stuff to it. European Highlander, 100-card singleton, 20 life, best of 3 vintage format without sideboards. It has a ban list instead of a point system. So, like, the point system is used instead of the ban list in a lot of things. We'll talk about this one, which is one, yes, when we talk about Arena, Gladiator. It's historic singleton. We'll talk about it. Scandinavian Highlander, or Scandlinier. Oh, God, I'm going to butcher that one there. Sorry. It's based on Canadian Highlander, but has its own council. So it's basically, they're more proxy-friendly, and have their own rule of bans, or, like, points of bans and stuff like things like that. And then, of course, Commander of the Elder Dragon Highlander, or EDH, which is the most popular version of Highlander. Judge's Tower. Alright, here's an interesting one. Now, this is something you could play yourself, but this is really a format that was developed for training judges. So, all the players share a 250 or 170 card deck and graveyard. You own every card you draw for purposes of things that you own stuff. You begin the game with 0 cards in hand. You must play every card in your hand as soon as legally possible. All optional modes are mandatory to the extent that you can fulfill them. You must activate every active ability of permanents you control once per turn per legal target as soon as possible. Always activate from the bottom of the card up. If a spell has an X cost, X is always 3. You must attack all legal attackers and block all legal blockers whenever options presented to you. If everybody has 20 life, that resets at every turn. You have infinite mana. You lose the round if your game, if you commit a game rule violation. That you play a game until there's a winner. The winner gets a point. Then exile all permanents, all cards in all graveyards, all cards in hands, and start the next round. When the deck is empty, the player with the most points wins. It's an interesting and strange format. If you want to try it out, knock yourself out. You know, you have to build a weird deck. You've got infinite mana. It's 250, 175 just random cards. Almost, it seems like. Lightning magic. Pew, pew, pew. So lightning magic is something that you could recreate, certainly, but it was something that came about as a fast, easy version of the game. And what it is it's some special mini decks of 12 cards from Portal. The object of the game was to reduce your opponent's score from 5 to 0, to basically deal them 5 damage. There are 12 card mini decks. It is a fast and easy. You can look at the Lightning Magic deck lists. I don't know if a lot of these have been reprinted, but certainly you could probably have versions of them that have similar stats and stuff like that. A lot of these things did have that, and some of them actually have had reprints in other sets. So, Lightning Magic. Might want to check out. Old School. So, Old School is basically a lot like some of the older formats, but it also traditionally uses older sets of rules. So, it's not only older card pools, but older rules. It's basically trying to play classic Magic as classic Magic was. The rules can vary when they do. Old School 93 and 94 were playing with cards that were printed in 93 and 94. So the first 2 years of Magic, it's Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, Dark, Fallen Empires. But not all Old School events use Fallen Empires. And any of the 94 previews, like Arena and Stewards of Argak. You can use reprinted versions of these cards that match them if they're, as long as they use the original Magic card frame, is the only thing. So, foils are not allowed, and stuff from other sets beyond there. 95 goes up through any set through Ice Age. Old School 96 includes Alliances and Mirage. Ancient Magic embodies the feeling of the first 10 years of Magic. It's Alpha through Scourge. Before the creation of the modern card frame. Old Frame Vintage is similar to Ancient Magic. But it's very similar to the Old Frame Vintage. Use the same card set. But this format is trying to recreate the 2003 Vintage format. So Portal sets started in 1999 are allowed. And the format is played with contemporary rules in errata and banned a restricted list as regular and modified as needed. So this is the thing here about this thing here. The format is played with contemporary rules in errata. While Ancient Magic is probably going to be played with the rules at the end of Scourge, Old Frame Vintage is using with contemporary rules in errata and banned and restricted lists. Pre-modern is a format bridges the gap between old school and modern. From 4th edition to Scourge, basically that's a one that kind of goes that area if you're playing there. And then middle school is a lot like pre-modern, but it allows the legality of every supplemental and box set during the course of the 95 to 2003 period. So these are all very various formats of playing older sets and stuff like that. Oathbreaker. It's a singleton format. It's casual. It's multiplayer. It's very similar to Commander, but it is different. And guess what? In 2023, in March of this year, the format was recognized by Wizards of the Coast, but they haven't had any products for it. So, hey, it's not DCI sanctioned yet, but, you know, it's been recognized by Wizards. Awesome. So what is this Oathbreaker? So you might hear more of it as it comes up. Rather than choosing a legendary creature as a commander, you select a planeswalker as your Oathbreaker, and then an instant or sorcery spell as the Oathbreaker's signature spell. You have the same rules as a commander for starting the game. It's in a command zone. 2 additional cost for changing zone after each additional cost and changing zones. Your signature spell is similar subject to rules, with 2 additional restrictions. You can only cast the signature spell when your Oathbreaker's on the battlefield, and it's always returned to the command zone upon resolution, overriding all of its effects, including things like buyback. Meaning that, you know, it's basically, yes, I can only cast my signature spell when my Oathbreaker is out, but it costs 2 each time extra. Oathbreaker's color identity restricts the deck construction. No 2 cards can share the same name except basic lands. Anything that says your commander can refer to your Oathbreaker. The deck must contain exactly 60 cards, including the Oathbreaker and signature spells. You start at 20 life. And it doesn't have the commander damage rules win condition. And it does have a banned list from the format's creators. But yes, Oathbreaker is in the rules and is recognized by Wizards, so good on them. Pauper Commander. What's that? It's Pauper, but Commander. That's basically. It's you know, it's a multiplayer format for 3 to 4 players normally. The 1v1 is popular. You know, Commander's been around now. This is just a version of it that, you know, you start at 30 light, you have 99 unique cards, and so the thing here is, headed by an uncommon creature that is the deck's commander. So unlike normal commander with a legendary, this you have one uncommon creature, which is your commander. The player dies after taking 16 damage from a single commander, because again you have 30 life. Other than that, it's like the rules of commander. So it's commanding Pauper and Commander. My, like, you know, epic commander is an uncommon thing. It does mean, this one also does allow promos, though. So if a card appeared in uncommon or common on online sets, like a couple of them they're legal in play, and you can search Scryfall to check a card's rarity from any set to kind of get an idea of that one there. There are only 2 cards banned in this format, Mystic Remore and Mystic Study. So other than that, all commons except for an uncommon commander. There you go. Pauper Commander. Another fun one. Peasant. This is one that's another casual one. You can't use rares. Okay. It's very similar to Pauper, except for one difference. You can contain up to 5 uncommon cards, and the rest are common. So this is a version of Pauper. It's another one that probably is very similar to it. It just basically allows you to have some variation. Yes, it's basically Pauper, except I get 5 uncommons that can kind of alter the way I play. And again, it makes it a little bit more peasant, you know. There you go. Plane Chase! I talked about Plane Chase on some discussing tabletops of more recent, but what Plane Chase is another way of playing. We talked about Chaos Magic. This is very similar to it. This might go more than 2 hours today. So, Plane Chase came about by Plane Chase 2012, Plane Chase Anthology, March of the Machines Commander, and which is out now, and the Doctor Who commander decks, which are going to be bring also more Plane Chase stuff out. But what is it? So everybody has a normal deck. Plane Chase can be played with pretty much anything that's kind of constructed. So it's a constructed format. You have a constructed format. You're playing Legacy, Vintage, Modern, Standard, whatever you're playing it. That's what you're doing. Then you have a deck of 10 planes or phenomena cards. You can only have at most 2 phenomena cards. This is the planar deck, which exists in a commander zone. And then at the beginning of the game, the starting player turns the top card of their planar deck face up, and its effects become present in the game. There will always be 1 plane card face up in the command zone at the beginning of each player's turn. That player gains control of the plane card in the command zone, known as the planar controller. So this, I actually, this format's a little different than I thought it was, because I usually just played with 1 big planar deck in the middle of it. But it seems like, and no 2 plane cards or phenom cards in a command set. It seems like everybody has their own one in this version of it, which is interesting. So anytime you could cast a sorcery, you may roll a planar die. It's 4 blanked and has the planeswalker symbol, which the planar controller puts the active plane or phenomena at the bottom of its owner's planar deck. Then the player who rolled the planar symbol turns the top card of their planar deck face up. So I guess it's a way that everybody can have their own planes, but I usually just, no one will own their own planes. I just had 1 big planar deck that we just all cycled through after shuffling it. So I guess either way works. Like that one's a little just a variation of it. But this one is like, oh, so first player puts over their plane, someone else changes it. I get my plane back, though the control has been shifting around. They put one of their other planes out. There's also a chaos symbol that activates the chaos ability. You can roll the planar dice more times than just once. You get so the rolling the planar dice costs an amount of mana equal to the number of times the player has taken the action so far done this turn. So if you haven't taken it at all, it costs you 0. If you've taken it once, it costs you 1 to do it again. If a planar controller would leave the game, instead the next player in turn order that wouldn't leave the game becomes planar controller. Then the old planar controller leaves the game. If the owner of the active plane leaves the game, the next player in turn order, the new player turns the top card of the planar deck. Okay, so it's a way that you can, I get this, it's a way that you can play even if people have to like leave the game. But I did casually with my friends, so they were going to hang around anyway. So interesting. It's Plane Chase. I like it as a format. Quantum Leap Magic. It's constructed. It allows original border from Alpha through Onslaught. It's very similar to Ancient, though it uses an older version of the rules. It uses 6th edition rules from 2003, with some few modifications. The main difference between Quantum Leap Magic and current Magic, combat damage on the stack, mana burn still occurs, artifacts turn off when tapped. In addition, a number of P9 cards present in a deck are limited to 3. Oh, Power 9 cards in a Quantum Leap deck are limited to 3. Okay. So, again, very similar to Ancient format, which you talked about under the old school. Rainbow Stairwell. This is an interesting one. It's a 60-card deck. It must be exactly 60 cards, with 6 cards of each of the 5 colors, as well as 6 artifacts and or 6 colorless cards. Only 1 copy of each card in your deck, with the exception of basic lands. And you must have 1 each for each color of cards with a converted mana cost of 1 through 6. What the hell does that all mean? You can't use multicolored cards. Okay, let's explain this. You have the Quantum Leap reference. So Rainbow Stairwell, I can have my lands. It's a rainbow deck. But I have to use 36 cards which are designated. The other 24 are probably going to be lands, honestly. You can only have 1 copy of each card in deck. So, again, 60-card deck, you could have 20 cards. It's 4 cards that you could have that are kind of extra. But for each of the 5 colors, let's say white, I must have 1 each for each color, a card of converted mana cost 1 through 6. The steps of it. So for white, I'd have to have a white card with a converted mana cost of 1, a white card with a converted mana cost of 2, of 3, 4, 5, 6. I can't use multicolor cards. I have to do that with white, black, blue, red, green, and either colorless or artifact, 1 through 6. After that, hey, that's 36 of my cards. I should have some lands. I can't have multicolored cards, but I should have lands, 1 copy of each. Honestly speaking, you're probably going to have to build a lot of non-basic lands, and you, in a normal 60-card deck where you'd have like 20 lands around that for your deck, you might want more to go that to 24 lands to fill it up. Honestly, the other four-ish cards, you could have a couple extra cards in there, but you've hit the rainbow's stairwell. They have to be unique in each of them. Retro Modern. So, what is this? It is a nostalgic casual constructed, which only allows only modern legal cards that have been printed in the original classic card frame. So, what does this mean? A card originally printed prior to 8th edition is reprinted in the modern legal set. Okay. Okay, let me take a drink and then I'll explain this. Because my brain's frying a little bit. I've been at this for an hour and a half. We're an hour and 45 minutes now. Okay. Boom. Okay. So, it only allows only modern legal cards that have been printed on the original classic style card frame. Okay. What does that mean? You know that the classic style card frame from basically Alpha to 8th edition, anything printed before 8th edition, okay? Well, there have been a lot of reprints. Anything that, anything that's before there. Okay. I'm having trouble explaining this for a second. Let me take some time. Anything that was reprinted and has a version of it that is modern legal from before modern came out is what you can use in retro modern. Okay? I'm supposed to be using the original version of it, but things like Counterspell, which I think there are modern versions, I'm pretty sure in one of the modern masters or something like that, Counterspell has been printed, but cards like that, which have been printed into the modern format now. Things are printed, basically, a modern legal card is printed in one of the original classic frame cards. Generally, so there's two ways. A card originally printed to 8th edition or before is reprinted in a modern legal set prior to 8th edition. So if Counterspell gets a modern legal version of it, it's legal. If something from Ice Age would get a modern legal version of itself, is legal in this. The other way of doing that is when you get those classic card frames that have become more popular nowadays that are like promos or special cards where they appear in the old card format, that becomes legal in this set. So basically, as long as you can have a version of a card that is in the old set but is technically modern legal, they've got lists on Scryfall to figure this out. It's kind of confusing. There's Solitaire Magic. I'm not going to go into those. There's a bunch of different ways of playing Magic on your own. If you want to look into them, go ahead. Star. It's a 5-player format. What does that mean? Well, it basically means that every player sits in a circle, white, blue, black, red, green, and you determine the player randomly, and each player then has a deck of that color. You may not include cards of different colors or land that produce different color mana. If I'm the white deck, I can't produce anything other than white mana. I can't have any cards other than white cards. That's my theme. It goes clockwise around the table. I would win if my two enemy players, so if I'm the white, if the black and red colored players are eliminated, regardless of who eliminates them. If you're defeated, you can't win either. And you cannot attack allied colors by default. So I can't attack the green or the blue characters or players by default. And this could be casual, standard, commander, legacy. It's a free-for-all. There are some variants with allied colors, double star, no color restrictions, things like that. There's victory conditions, attacking ally. There's a lot of variants on this idea. But it's an idea of 5 players, different things. If you want to look up the variants, I'd say do that. Supervillain Rumble I will mention because it's a variation of Arch Enemy. What is Supervillain variant? Everybody begins with 40 life. Everybody has a scheme deck. That's it. You're all supervillains. Rather than Arch Enemy normally where it's one person with a scheme deck versus everybody else. Everybody has their own scheme deck and everybody schemes against each other. It's a Supervillain Rumble. Tiny Leaders is a format similar to Commander. It uses a commander. It's a singleton format. But the thing is here is it restricts the deck building to cards with a converted mana cost of 3 or less. It has its own banned restricted cards. Every card, it's a 50 card deck that includes a general. It can have a sideboard up to 10 cards. You start with 25 life. Each player's starting hand before mulligans is 8 minus the number of cards in your command zone. That's an important thing. So if I have 1 commander, I have 7 cards. If I have 2 for partnered commanders, I have 6. You can only have 1 copy, except for basic lands. You have a color identity that's equal to your general. You choose a legendary creature or super partner, which is their commander. Decks may use other legendary creatures as well. Partner commanders are only legal if their combined color identities is less than 4 total colors. Why is that? Well, think about this. Converted mana cost of 3 or less. You have to have 3 color identity at most in your deck. The commander, a partner commander would add up to a 4th, they say. There are some variations in it that you can look into, like the 3 color limit does not apply. You start with more life. Changing a little things here, but it's an interesting idea of like low cost cards. Vanguard is a format we'll talk about because I wanted to talk about this before some other stuff. Basically, Vanguard was a format that was a card type that does exist. You could find Vanguard cards out there. I think they were printed. They might not have been printed. It's a card type for Magic the Gathering debuted in arenas summer 1997, and yeah. There were cards that were out there. Duelist magazines had cards in them. Magic Online was the biggest place. There's a mystery booster. Basically what it is you start with a Vanguard card. It's got some similarities to the idea of like something like Commander. You have a extra special card called a Vanguard. It's like a famous Magic the Gathering candle. Modifies the game rules just for you. It's normal constructed deck for whatever format you're playing. Plus a pre-selected Vanguard card. Standard, Modern, Legacy, or Vintage are the normal ones. Everyone would build under that one. You have a Vanguard card. It's effective duration for each duel. Each event will have specific own rules and methods for frequency, selecting cards to be used. Each player's Vanguard card is effect throughout the duel. Vanguard cards may not be targeted, removed from play, or otherwise affected. Unless specific to state, Vanguard cards' effects extend only to the control of the cards, and other permanents if applicable. And Vanguard cards must be visible at all times. So, yeah, Vanguard exists. It's a format. Let's hit the Magic Onlines, and then we'll do the... No, let's hit the multiplayer for casual first, because that's the last kind of major group I want to do. Then we'll do the Magic Online stuff. Then I will do the limited draft for casual, and then we'll talk about the arena things and finish up for today. Hopefully be done by like 2.5 hours. This is going to be the longest session of this I think I'm going to be doing. Just because there's a lot of them. And I didn't want to do 2 because there wasn't a breaking point. I originally was going to do 2. But there's so many formats, and there's not a good breaking point between them. Alternating teams is one of the casual multiplayer formats. What does this mean? Well, you have a number of teams of two or more teams of equal size. So, however many teams you have, they all have to be equal size. You have a range of influence of 2. What does range of influence mean? Well, it means that I can affect players up to 2 away on either of my sides. Exactly one of the attack left, attack right, or attack multiple persons options must be used. It just means, like, can I only attack to my left? Can I only attack to my right? Can I attack both ways within my influence? That is basically the option. The deploying creatures options that normally ruled. We'll talk about deploying creatures. And at the start of the game, you're not seated next to a teammate. You're evenly spaced out. So let's say there's 3 teams of 3. It'd be person from team 1, person from team 2, person from team 3, person from team 1, person from team 2, person from team 3, person from team 1, person from team 2, person from team 3 around the table. And those 9 players. That's how you break it apart. You can attack opponents who aren't seated next to you. The direction does matter, though, for determining that. We talked about that. Planeswalkers that aren't controlled by opponents seated next to them, or battles that aren't protected by opponents seated next to them. So even, again, your influence is 2, but you can only attack adjacent people, whether or not the direction of attack is stated by the way you're playing. That means I could cast spells on people 2 away. Your resources are your own, and your life is on your own, and that's about it. So there's alternating teams. Emperor is another format, which you may have heard of. It's another popular multiplayer format. Basically, the team, which traditionally has at least 3 people, possibly more, has one person who is the Emperor. The other people are the general or lieutenants that protect the Emperor. Players determine who goes first, and one of the Emperors goes first, and then turns proceed to the left. So as the Emperor, I would go first, then whoever's to my left would go, and whoever's to my right would go before I go again, but they'd be the last one to go. So whoever's going first has a kind of advantage, but I also have like a... my teammate's the last one to go. And you go in order. You don't go together. It's a constructed format, so you do like Commander, Modern, Standard, Pauper, Vintage, Legacy, whatever. So you play as individuals. You can look at each other's hands, discuss strategy. You each have a separate life, library, hand, battlefield, and so on. Your creatures have deployability, which is tap. Target teammate gain control of this creature. You can only use this when you can use a sorcery. So yes, I can give my creatures to another person. If I'm the commander, I can start giving my creatures or the Emperor, I can give my creatures to my people to help defend me. When a player eliminates the game, all cards they own, including creatures controlled by other players, are exiled and vanished from the game. So it is important that if one of my creatures is under someone is exiled, if they have it. Also, any permanents they have if they die goes away. You can only attack opponents seated next to you, meaning that if you're doing 2 groups of emperors of 3, two emperor groups, 3 players each, to my left side, that person can only attack to their left. To my right side, that person can only attack to my right, to their right, and everybody has a range of influence of 2. So with my range of influence of 2, emperors have a range of influence of 2. Generals have a range of influence of 1. Meaning that the generals can cast spells on me and their opponent. I can cast stuff on the people that they're fighting to help them out. Yeah. World effects affect everybody. When someone's eliminated, their seat doesn't count anymore. So, in order to affect for my generals to affect an opposing emperor, someone has to be eliminated first. So basically, once the emperor loses, the game is out. You can play with more than 2 teams. It does free-for-all rules if you're doing that. And teams can have more than 3 members on them, but they have to be the exact same. And it's basically an additional general, and they will put them the same direction. So if I, as an emperor, have 2 generals on my right and 1 general on my left, then all the other emperors would have 2 on their right, 1 on their left. It has to be the same. Otherwise than that, it's you know, that's kind of the breakdown. Free-for-all, though, speaking of, is another casual version of Magic. It's basically a constructed limited format, and you do whatever. You agree on a rule for attacking, is basically the only thing. It might be attack left, which you only attack right, attack multiple players. You can attack different players with the same attack. You basically decide the way that the free-for-all works, if there's any kind of restrictions or not. It usually depends on the number of players you have, whether you put a bunch of restrictions like attacking left, attacking right. If I've got like 3 players, I'm probably not going to do that. 4 players, probably not going to do that. You know, but if I get up to like 6 or 7 players, I might want the attack right, attack left options. Grand Melee is a version of free-for-all for basically 10 or more players. Yes. It limits range of influence, having a range of influence of 1. That's the first big thing here. Which means also if I play anything that has a global effect, it affects me and my neighbors. If I play something like Coalition Victory, it causes my 2 neighbors to lose the game instead of me winning the game. Or if I play Wrath of God, it destroys all 3 of our creatures, but it doesn't affect everybody. Multiplayer players take turns at the same time in a Grand Melee. There's turn markers, which you have 1 turn marker per 4 players, and effectively, so like if you have 16 players, you have 4 turn markers. Someone gets 1, chosen at randomly, and then after 4 seats down, the next person gets 2. 4 seats down, the next person gets 3, and so on. I'm gonna blow my nose again, and then take a drink of actual water. Yeah. Ugh. Turn markers handed out. Then everybody starts the game. People with turn markers take their turns, then pass it along. A person who receives a turn marker can't take their turn if a player to their left in order 3 seats down has a turn marker. So they have to wait until that person passes their turn marker along. If you get an extra turn while you have a turn marker, you take your extra turn. If you gain a extra turn while if it's not your turn and you get an extra turn, you take that turn immediately when you would get before your next turn would occur. So if it's my turn marker hasn't come up to me, I get an extra turn. I don't take it until the turn marker's getting to me. Then I take that extra turn first. Then I take my normal turn. If a player losing the game reduces the number of turn markers, then basically the people taking their turns, and then the turn marker closest to the departed player disappears. If multiple people are removed, then remove the lowest number. Because remember, turn markers are 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 would disappear then, if that's the closest one to the person. Last player survives wins. Grand Melee. Horde Magic. Horde Magic is a cooperative group against an automated deck. You have an automated deck that everybody fights against. There's specific rules for it. It's basically fighting against a deck, like a zombie deck or something in High Blaze. There's 2 factions, the Horde and then the Survivors. If the Horde wins, if the Survivors' life total is reduced to 0. The Survivors win if the Horde has no cards in its library, no cards in its hand, and no creatures on the battlefield. So it has to be all 3 of those things. The Horde player pilots itself. It's random if it has a choice. It's infinite mana. It starts by revealing cards to the top of the library until non-token cards are revealed. All revealed tokens are instantly put into play. The revealed non-token card is then cast. If applicable, the Horde casts any cards that can be cast from its graveyard, as well as from the hands. Its creatures have haste and must attack each turn if able. It has no life table, and damage dealt to the Horde caused that many cards from the top of the Horde's library to put into the graveyard. The Survivors have 3 turns to build their defenses, and then the Horde gets its first turn. And then it alternates like normal turns. It's like Two-Headed Giant, where the Survivors are a team that takes their turns simultaneously. They have a life total that the Survivors have 20 per life per survival you play. There's adjustments that can be made. And then finally, team versus team, which is kind of the casual, which is you have teams of 2 or more. There's things like you could do range and stuff like that, but it's basically two teams of people fighting against each other. Pretty simple. We're done most of these. Let's talk the Magic Online formats then quickly and efficiently. And we'll continue to move on, because this will take up most of them. And then we'll have the Limited Draft Casual. We'll do the Magic Arena ones to finish out, and hopefully we'll be done by 2 hours and 30 minutes. So Magic Online introduced us to 1v1 Commander. It's dual commanders, starting life of 30. It's got its own ban list. Honestly, you could probably play this in physical format. That's basically it. 30 life, single to dex, exactly cards. It's Commander, but 1v1. We talked about a version of that. The big thing I want to talk about here is Brawl. Brawl uses standard legal cards. It was originally designed for Magic Online. It has been an arena sanctioned format. I'm going to mute it for a second if I blow my nose. Brawl has some similarities to Commander. There are some differences, and the size of the card pool makes a difference. So, it's usually constructed from standard format. You designate a legendary planeswalker or legendary creature as your commander. It has to have 60 cards, including its commander. So minimum deck size and maximum deck size of 60. If the player's commander has no color identity, its color identity is... in its color identity, that player's deck must contain any number of basic lands of one basic land type of their choice. It's an exception to the rule. If a two-player Brawl game, the player's starting total life is 25. Multiplayer, the starting life is 30. So, it's basically very similar to Commander. It's multiplayer. If you would... Hang on, I'll buy water. If you're two-player, your life total is 25. If you're multiplayer, your life is 30, not 40. You get one free mulligan like multiplayer games. Your deck list is 60. Any Planeswalker can be a commander regardless of whether they have the ability to be a commander or not in Brawl. So that's a big thing. Normally, a Planeswalker has to have the ability to become a commander, to be your commander. And then standard leaguer cards are used. So it uses standard leaguer ban list. And the commander damage rules do not apply, and you can use multiple copies of any one basic land in decks with colorless commanders. So other than that, that is Brawl. There was Brawl decks that came out during Throne of Eldraine, so Brawl has had some support. Not much since then, but it's there. There's some variants to it. Freeform. So, it allows all cards and sets. It's an online Magic sanctioned. Multiple Vanguard cards, any number of copies, 40 card deficits, no banned cards on Freeform. So Freeform is basically play with them whatever the hell you want to play. Freeform is insanity, because any number of copies of cards. It's just Plague Rats. We're just going to have the Plague Rat deck. Let's talk Momir. Because there are, in fact... 3 versions of Momir. They're basically all the same, and they're really an online-only format. So if you're going to play one, it's going to be online. And there's a Magic Online, and then there's a couple of Magic Arena formats. Meaning I don't have to talk about them. But the Magic Online version is exactly 60 basic lands, and one Momir Zir Simic Visionary Avatar. With it, you normally start with 24 life, and it grants you the ability... X, discard a card, create a token as a copy of a creature with a converted mana cost of X, chosen at random. Activate this ability only when you can cast a story each turn. Basically, it's random creatures. You have a 60-card basic land deck, and just throw out random creatures and see what happens of, you know, you're discarding lands to do this, and a converted mana cost. It's insanity. A Magic Arena had Momir's Madness, which is a variation of it, which they had a... They don't have the life bonus, but you've got the same emblem that does the same thing. And it's only cards available on Arena, though, and currently in the historic format. And it has 12 copies of each basic land in it. And then there was also an arena, and a little later on, there was a Momir Planeswalker variant as part of the War Spark promotion. The thing is, it takes the Momir's Madness and adds 1 copy of each of the 36 Planeswalkers from War of the Spark in addition to the basic lands. So, all 36 Planeswalkers of War of the Spark are also in there. You know, you can play Planeswalkers as normal or have the discard token for a creature. And there's also an 80-card deck with a selection of multicolored spells for multicolored Momir. Those are all the different versions of Momir. Penny Dreadful. So, this is one that's based on Magic Online. Certainly you could play this in physical space, because you can figure out the cost of it. Why? Because Penny Dreadful uses anything that costs 0.02 ticks, or tickets, in Magic Online. You can look up the cost of those. The legality changed after 2020. It used to be 0.01 ticks. It's now 0.02 because Pioneer increased the price of a lot of things. They have a ban list. Basically, uncommons, rares, mythics that have a ring. There's around 14,000 cards legal in the format. It's constructed 60-card deck, 15-card sideboard, limit of 4 cards per each. When every new standard legal set releases, the format rotates. Basically, when a new standard legal set is added in to the mix, at that point in time, the format is checked, and any kind of changes in price will change the Penny Dreadful thing there. So, again, you could play this physically in Magic, you just have to look up the price of everything. Prismatic Magic, again, another one that's originally online. The deck must contain 250 cards and at least 20 cards of each color. If a card is multicolored, you choose which color it counts for purpose of that. So if I have a red-green card, I would choose whether it counts towards my 20 red or 20 green. It follows the big deck mulligan rule. It's 250 cards, and you've got 100 cards of at least different colors, you know? It's a big old deck. You can, again, probably do this in physical life, but shuffling out a 250 card deck is just... That's why it's a Magic Online more than anything. Anyway. Singleton. It's a simplified version of Highlander. It's a Singleton deck. It has a 100-card deck. It has no 100-card deck minimum. It's basically a lot like the other ones. It's a lot like all the other ones we've talked about, with the single deck things. It works consistently. It contains no duplicates. It can be a creative challenge. It's perfect format for take small card collections. Might not have multiple copies of things. So it doesn't have a 100-card minimum. That's basically it. The simplified version of Highlander using standard, modern, legacy, or vintage deck building rules. So that's basically it. It's basically playing standard, modern, legacy, or vintage with singles. That's Singleton. Tribal Wars. You're constructing a deck that is built around a creature, combat, and tribal theme. 1/3 of your deck must be of a creature type. So if you're playing a Goblin deck, 1/3 of your deck must be Goblin. At least 60 cards. Has to be either standard, modern, legacy, or vintage deck building rules. And that's it. It's an online one. Originally, can be played in physical. There is a Magic Online version that is 4-pack sealed deck. Unlike the 6 booster pack one, it's a variation. That's basically there. There's Cube Draft. What is a Cube Draft? Again, another one that's originally... you can play it physical too. What does this mean? You create a specifically set number of cards of at least 360 cards. A cube, which a player has kind of selected, or your play group. It can have up to 720 cards provided for more variety. Once it's been built, you can use any draft format. You're basically drafting from it. You make the most popular option is to make basically makeshift boosters, randomly select 15 cards from the cube, run a random booster draft. You can also use the Winston, Solomon, all the other kind of draft things. It's basically an idea that you come up with a selection of cards for you and your friends to play from. You kind of, honestly, Magic Online's a better place to do it, but you can physically do a cube in real life too. There was a Kamigawa remix which was online in April of 2022 using Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and the original Kamigawa block. It was a limited format. It's kind of gone there. It was a draft format. And then Supreme Draft, it's what it is rather than queuing into a draft pool with several humans or bots, the Supreme Draft is a single-player draft queue. Once you're drafted, you're presented 18 unopened packs, and one at a time, from which you must choose 2 cards per pack. After choosing 2 cards per pack, you open the next pack and take 2 more cards until you've drafted 36 cards from the 18 packs. Then you build a minimum 40-card deck with your draft picks, and you play on a league format and online there. So basically, it's you get a whole bunch of packs and get 2 cards from each, and you build a deck out of it. There you go. Let's talk the limited draft formats for casual. As I open up a bunch of them here, because we are very close to being done. All of these here. There's auction draft, which is a players bid publicly for cards they want to add to their card pool. You get 3 booster packs, and those are opened without looking and shuffled together. After that, each player is given a sound amount of funds to use their cards, whether it's Fox Money and Notepad to keep track of it. Generally, you get this like 120, more or less. After the player decides who bids first in a random method, next the top card of the pile is flipped over. Going clockwise, starting with the first player, the player starts bidding on some funds on the card. On their turn for bidding, a player may opt out of the auction, continue bidding until all players opt out. Then the player loses that much money, adds a card to the card pool. Process repeating to all but one player is out of money. Then the player gives as many cards as they gives as many cards is needed until they have 45 cards. It's a little complex. It's drafting. It's you know, a little interesting, but it's a format. The backdraft format. It's like a booster draft. Not like a booster draft, however, the players don't play with the cards they drafted. Instead, the players are paired with one another. They switch card pools and build from the other's pool. Yeah. It's kind of weird because you want to draft badly. That's the way it is. It's because you're switching with someone, you're trying to draft the worst you can. Which is kind of weird because everybody's trying to do that and to build that. It's a backdraft. It's an interesting format to play. Commander draft. You start a booster draft. Each player sits around the table in a random order with 3 booster packs. The packs are open. The cards are drafted from your card pool, 2 at a time. Then the players break off into 4 game pods. The season is also random. You can attack multiple opponents. Opposing planeswalkers during combat. Every start fight total. Total 1 per player is left standing. After the draft, the player builds a 60-card deck, much like a traditional Magic card deck. A 60-card with traditional draft is 40. Here's the minimum of 60 to Commander's 100. All the Commander rules apply, with the exception. So your roll tool does not apply. You may play with multiple copies of this draft. It's a different version. You kind of build you basically do a draft, break into smaller groups, fight it out, then the bigger group kind of plays together. Conspiracy draft is using the conspiracy cards. It's a multiplayer format. You have to use conspiracy to take the crown. It's intended to be drafted with those. It includes conspiracies. It's a booster draft. Yep. It works well with 8 players. Continuous draft. God. The draft formats, there's a lot of them. So, each player starts by opening 3 booster packs and choosing 1 card to keep out of future drafts. In order to draft, you need to find another player with a 44-card pool. After randomly determining who picked first, that player shuffles all 88 cards together. Player A reveals the top 4 cards and then selects one of those cards. Player B selects 2 cards. Player A gets the last card. This process continues alternating between A and B, choosing first until all cards have been drafted. At the point, players may add any number of basic lands as they build decks 40 cards in play. You complete 2 out of 3 matches. When you're finished, take out the extra lands, getting back down to 44 cards, and then repeat the process of drafting and building with the next player. There you go. An interesting style. Duplicate sealed. 5 booster packs are opened, and a list with the contents of the pack is provided to each of the players. They then use their own cards to recreate the exact same pool and build a sealed deck using regular limited rules, adding as many basic lands as they like. So basically, it's like you open 5 booster packs. Here's the card list you can choose to build from. An interesting version of it. Fat Stack. Use 2 pre-prepared stacks of cards, which are used as common libraries. The first stack features cards that can't produce mana. The second stack features only lands and other cards that produce mana. Whenever a player pulls a card, they may do so from either stack. That includes drawing the 7 cards for your opening hand. Choosing which stack of cards to draw from each turn is a fascinating challenge. Do you draw more mana production or another card? There you go. Fat Stack is an interesting one. Flavor Draft. This is where players build their opponent's card pool as drafted as normal, except, yeah. Whew. So, build your opponent's card pool. It is drafted and played as normal, except the fact that in-game flavor trumps when the written flavor text the card. This is a weird one. I don't know a lot about it. You got to flavor judge. Mental Magic. A card can be played as any card in the game with the exact same mana cost. So, what does this mean? All you need is an opponent and a stack of non-land cards to fill both of your decks. Players start with 7 cards in hand, like a normal, but all players draw from the same library of cards. Cards can be played 1 of 2 ways. Any card can be played face down as a Utopia, a basic land that's capable of producing any color mana. There are basic lands but have no subtype. Still only play 1 land on your turn. A card can be maybe played as any Magic card with the same mana cost as that card, except the card is in order to mentally play the card, a player must be able to accurately describe the card text with no outside help. Like, I would be able to play Lightning Bolt, do 3 damage to player, creature or player, but the player can't. But it can only be played once per game. Oh, this is such a weird one. All right, I'm just gonna stop on that one. It's a mental challenge. Good luck on that one. These are some really weird formats at this point in time. Interesting formats. Creative but unusual. Mini-Maxers or Pack Wars. You start with a single booster pack and 15 basic lands. Yeah. Each player needs a single booster pack of Magic cards. Without looking at the contact, each player opens their pack, adds in 3 basic lands of each type. The random booster pack, basic land and marketing card are removed, and then shuffle up and play a game of Magic as normal. You do not know what cards are in your deck. That's it. It's a mini one. There you go. It's a fun little format. Pie Grow Magic. It's played with a single booster pack. Again, another one of those ones. It's like Pie Go Poker. It's named for the Pie Grow game, like China's Dominoes. Each player opens a single pack, looks at the contents, and distributes its contents into 5 face-down piles of 3 cards. Afterwards, the order of the face-down pile is randomized. For instance, if your opponent arranged them, you play 5 consecutive games, separate games of Magic, and each player's first pile becomes the opening hand. God, that's an interesting way of doing it. For creativity, add another one. These ones are very interesting. Pick-a-Pack. So it's like a normal booster pack for one change. Instead of using 3 booster packs of the most recent block, players are allowed to pick packs from any Magic set. That means players to your left could be using a pack of Darksteel, Ravnica, and Ice Age, 2 Shadowmere and 10th edition for them. Each player brings 3 booster packs to the draft. And those packs are collected in a common... there is a variation, basically, draft pack, which you bring 3 to a pool before each draft of cards are into a common pool. Before the player draft the cards out of the boosters, they draft the boosters themselves. Once all the packs are picked, the actual booster draft begins. And Pick-a-Pack can be used with some other draft formats like Solomon or Winston, which we're going to be talking about in a minute. Reject Rare Draft is a format of booster draft. Instead of using booster packs, each player brings 45 rares, often ones which are usually not useful. They shuffle them up and separate them into 15-card booster packs, distribute them randomly amongst players, then you draft as normal from the pack. It's any rare which the owner cares little or so willing to donate to the draft. Yeah, it's reject rares. Rotisserie Draft. God, these so many drafts that are very interesting. Okay, so rather than each drafter opening a random assortment of cards from a pool, often with the cards appearing multiple times in the same draft, every single card from a subset of Magic cards is legal and every card appears once. So Rotisserie Draft requires 1 or 2 complete Magic Gathering sets, 1 copy of each card, and the number of players, such as the number of cards divided by the number of players, is around 40 to 50 players. Each card is placed face up on the table in collected number order. You roll a die to determine who gets to pick first, second, third, or fourth. The first player chooses a card and removes it from the pool of available cards. It continues for players 2 through 8. However, rather than passing over the first player, the draft snakes back and forth, and the second player round picks are made by the 8th player through the first player. So you go 1 to 8, 8 to 1, 1 to 8, 8 to 1. After each player has made a 45 selections, players make 40 card decks and add basic lands. Solomon's Draft. It's a draft that allows for 2 people. 3 booster cards, which they open without looking at the contents. All 6 characters are shuffled together, creating a 90-card pool. Then someone's player A, someone's a player B, through a random method. Player A gets to draft first, while player B gets to choose whether they want to play first. To draft, the player flips over the top 8 cards of the deck, then divides them into 2 piles. They can be divided evenly into 2 piles of 4 cards or disproportionately. Once player A splits the cards, player B picks one of those piles and adds it to the drafted cards. Then the player A gets it. So basically, I get to, as player A, I would pick up the top 8 cards. I divide them. Player B gets to choose first out of those divides, and then I get the other pile. So you try to weigh it. The 4 and 4 is an easy way, but you might try to want to weigh it. So it's like, oh, this rare. You're probably going to take this. So this is 1, and I get the 7 cards. And then you proceed until you get at least 40 cards with basic lands. And the last batch will have 10 cards. Solomon's Draft. Type 4, sometimes known as DC 10 or Limited Affinity, it's similar to Draft Cube. It's a drafted pool of cards pre-constructed for this purpose, though the variation of the rules are not uncommon. So, the rules that are kind of different is unlimited quantities of mana. Each player has access to an arbitrary large amount of mana at all times. Infinite indestructible shrouded basic lands. But you can only play 1 spell on each turn. So yeah. The concept of any card throughout the game, usually casting cost will top right corner of the game. Force of Will, extremely strong. It allows you to counter an opponent's spell even after playing your 1 spell on your own turn. on each of your one spell on each turn, meaning I could play an instant on an opponent's turn. There's other ways to play it, but that's the basic way of it. Winchester Draft. This is going to be a long one. So, it's like Winston Draft. All supplied products are put into one large stack, separated into smaller piles with one card in each of those beginning. Usually 4 piles are used. These piles are placed face up, and the cards of the pile are known. The first player must choose a pile, then 1 card from the stack is added to each pile. Oh god, I'm brain farted. So Winston Draft is the other one to go with this one. Large supply of cards. 2-player format. 3 boosters. Up to 4 players. Oh god. Sorry. Oh. Players open the packs, combine them together into one pile. 90 cards in a 2-player formats. They're the main stack. The top 3 cards are placed separately. 3 stacks. 1 player randomly chooses the first one, takes a look at it, decides if they want it, then puts a card from it, does it for the second and the third, and then if they don't choose any of those, takes the top card. Then the second player does the same again, but now there's 2 cards in the pile that they look on, repeats that process with the second and third process, and then and does until all is drafted. Winston Draft. Boom. Done. Awesome. Let's goddamn talk about the freaking couple of ones that are in Arena. Because there's a couple in here, including Molmir's Madness, Molmir's Planeswalker. We don't have to talk about them. Alchemy is the big one. Guess what Alchemy is? It's basically a digital-only format. So Alchemy is, honestly, it's Magic Arena's version of Hearthstone. Digital-only cards, rebalance cards in the middle of the set. It's kind of like Standard, except that. That's it. It's Alchemy. That's the only difference is it's all the cards in Standard, except they rebalance the cards, and also, so they change some of the cards you might own. And digital-only cards appear in Alchemy. So if you're playing Alchemy, that's what you have to expect. Arena Standard is basically Standard with a few different rules, but it's playing Standard on Arena. Artisan is playing with common or uncommon cards, either Standard or Historic format, minimum 60 cards in the main deck, maximum 250 cards, of course it's maximum on Arena, 15 card starboard, no more than 4 copies, and that's basically using everything that's on Arena. You could probably play Artisan in physical world, just because we know what cards are on Arena. If it's available only in Rare and Mythic on Arena, it's not legal for this format. So that's another important thing. Arena basically determines it whether you play it in physical or not. Gladiator is a 100-card singleton, 20 life. It's using the Historic format pool of cards, basically all the Arena card pools. It does allow for digital-only cards. Rebalance cards are not usually played. It's best of 3 format. There you go. It's very similar to Commander that way. Historic format. It's an Arena only. Basically, it's whatever is in on Arena. That's the easy way of saying it. It's anything that's not in the Standard formation on Arena format. Rotation in Arena is available for Historic. Historic uses Rebalance Alchemy cards as of December 2021. So it's a living format, very similar to Alchemy, but it doesn't use the Alchemy cards, but it uses the rebalanced cards. So that's an important difference between that and Alchemy. Well, actually, it might use the Alchemy cards. But because it's all things and Alchemy is just Standard. Mastermind is a Magic Arena specific thing that happened. In the formats, you're given a large singleton tech, 180 cards, and an emblem with the ability, as long as 0 lands enter the battlefield under the control this turn, and it's your turn, each card in your hand has discard this card, create a colorless land token with tap, add 1 mana of any color. You can use as a sorcery. So, you can trade out cards from your large 180 card single deck into lands with an emblem of a mastermind. So very similar to mental magic, which we talked about sort of. Oko's Madness is very similar to Momir's Madness, except it's got the Oko card, which creatures you control have base power toughness of 3/3 and are Elix addition to the other Skype, and you have 1 discard create token copy of a random creature card with a converted mana card of 8 or less. It's only basic lands and then this. And there are creatures that have 8 mana value that was added to Arena because of this. Sleeper Agent, again, along that same level, is you get an emblem with Sleeper Agent. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose a creature card in your hand at random. This is a very online-only one. It perpetually becomes prerequisite to other types. When a Phyrexian creature you control deals combat damage to player, they get 2 poison counters. So it's a 60-card deck, 15-card sideboard, no more than 1 copy of each individual card in your main deck and sideboard except for basic lands. And you can just change a card at random into a Phyrexian in your hand. Can't be played, honestly, that one you definitely can't play in real life. This one, I think you could play in real life. The standard Cascade. So, you get a Maelstrom Nexus emblem that has the Cascade ability. When you cast the first spell each turn, exile the top cards of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs a less. You may cast that with paying its mana cost. Put this extra card at the bottom of your library in any order. Honestly, it's Maelstrom Nexus, except everybody has it. In the standard construction, 60-card deck, 50 cards, no 4 of individual and sideboards and stuff. There's a ban list for standard Cascade, but it's Cascade. Jump In is basically Jump Start, except on Arena. Omniscience emblem for an Omniscience deck was a drafted 40-card deck, and every player begins... So it's a draft format, Omniscience Draft. Each player begins with an Omniscience emblem. You may cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. 0, add 1 mana of each color to your mana pool, activated with ability each one. Your starting hand size is 3 instead of 7. It has all the normal draft boosters with sideboard and stuff. Except you just get this... you can play cards with free, and you can add mana. Finally. That's it. I think we're done. Cool. Damn it. Whew. God. I'm exhausted, but... Whew. There we go. I hope I handled all of these enough and got through them enough. These are the majority of formats in Magic the Gathering you can play. This is a hell of an episode. I'm going to try to timestamp it all. Good luck to me. The timestamps might come in days after it's uploaded. Oh, I hope you learned some things about the different formats in drafting and non-drafting. I should have done drafting and non-drafting as two episodes. That would have been the smart thing. Separate the draft formats from the non-draft formats. That would have at least cut it in a bit. And not had my brain die during casual draft format. But I hope everybody learned some things about the different ways you can play Magic, and there's a large variety. There's maybe, other than the basic ones that you might know about, there might be one out there that you might want to play. Maybe you want to play Supervillain Rumble. Maybe you want to play Flavor Town. Maybe you want to bring back Lightning Magic and buy some old Portal set stock cards. Maybe you want to bring Tribal Wars from Magic Online to your physical game. Some kind of cube. There's a lot of formats. So, anyway, Magic the Gathering has a lot of ways to play it, and honestly speaking, however you support Wizards nowadays, whether you want to buy more Magic cards or not, if you have some Magic cards and you've played a bunch, you still can have ways of playing that are different. You can find new and interesting ways to play. And I hope that that's put this out here, that if you still enjoy Magic the Gathering, regardless of how you feel at any time about, companies that produce the cards and stuff like that, you can certainly find a way to do it. So, I hope everybody has a great day out there. I'm going to get going because I'm tired and honestly exhausted myself with this entire thing. I'm going to go relax a bit. So until that next time, farewell everybody.